Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Connection, a podcast where I bring you news from Korea, from everything from mobile gaming to casual gaming, all the way down to the most niche areas of Korean esports. This is episode 5. For those of you who we were just talking about in chat, if you weren't aware that episode 3 and 4 happened, they did, and I will be uploading all of them together as well. So my apologies on that front. If you're tuning in for the first time, my name is Chobra. I've worked in esports for the past. I was actually just talking about this with my friend Matt Demers yesterday on a different podcast we started, but I guess now 8-9 years. I guess going into my ninth year. And I've worked both in the U.S. and then in Korea as well. So it's always been a big interest of mine to share that knowledge and information across the different regions. And that's where the connection was born. Every week we talk about just kind of what the gaming scene is like in Korea, maybe some new games coming out, some gaming news, or game development within Korea, and then of course we cover a little bit of esports as well, because I know a lot of my fans follow the esports scenes across different games, and that should give you a better idea of kind of what's working, what's popular, and maybe what's coming up in Korea in comparison to the rest of the world. As always, every week we like to kick things off with the PC Cafe charts. Again, for those perhaps tuning in for the first time, or if you're just not very aware of how the ecosystem works in Korea, Korea is one of those regions where PC cafes or internet cafes are hugely popular and have been very core to the gaming sphere or the gaming community pretty much since PC cafes were born in the 90s. So this is something that kind of dictates, right, what game is in the lead, or it's a good quick picture and a glance, even today. Starting, I want to say last week, well, maybe even 2 weeks ago, we've started seeing an interesting change in the PC Cafe rankings. We talked about it briefly last week, and it's the return of Sudden Attack. Now, Sudden Attack is a game I've talked about, in comparison to other games like Apex Legends, in the past, just to get a better picture of how FPS games are in Korea, and also the idea of the Korean community generally sticking with one game that they are familiar with. And if the new version just doesn't really do it for them, they'll immediately go back to the old version. Sudden Attack is a good example of that. Obviously, StarCraft to some extent is a good example of that. For those RPG fans out there, Maple Story is a great example of that. Maple Story, the original one, is still going so strong in Korea. But Sudden Attack is an FPS game, and it is now, in the most recent week, so the first week of March, rank 3 in the PC cafes. Now, rank 3 means it is above FIFA Online 4, Overwatch, Maple Story, StarCraft, World of Warcraft, Cartwriter, Lost Ark. I mean, it's the only 2 games above it are League of Legends, which currently no game is even looking to touch in that first place ranking in the internet cafes, and then PUBG. But I would say PUBG maybe needs to be a little bit concerned, because if we're looking at the chart, PUBG currently has 8.4% of the playtime in PC cafes, whereas Sudden Attack is closely following at 7.3%. Why is that? I mean, there's a lot of different reasons, but Sudden Attack launched a huge campaign towards the end of last year, coming into this year, with a massive update. And they've added a lot of new cosmetics. We talked about that last week. Actually, one thing I wasn't aware of was apparently they also added a character so they add celebrity characters into this FPS game. And apparently they added Mina Kim. So for those of you who follow LCK, that's the same Mina Kim you might know of, who is kind of the main reporter for the LCK and other gaming broadcasts here in Korea as well. But so like she's in the game, a lot of K-pop stars are in the game, so that's one way that they've always kept interest. But I mean, coming all the way back up to rank 3 is a pretty big feat. There have been, there's always been this regular fluctuation of games rising back into the rankings, especially if it's a game that's been around for a while, right? We see like Cartwriter coming back up now and then, certain RPGs like really making a big wave if they have a huge content update. But Sudden Attack, they were sitting at around 3% last fall, consistently, really not seeing any movement. really just barely fitting into the top 10, and then now being into the top 3 is a pretty big deal. Now, for League of Legends fans and those who follow PC Cafe rankings, that it may not seem like it, just because League of Legends is, up there for, at like 40 to 50% all the time. But that is generally how it goes, right? The rank 1 is just kind of untouchable, whichever game it is at the time. But because that's so big, you can't ignore that there are these other games that are still being played quite a bit. And again, always keep in mind, this is strictly in relation to PC cafes, right? More and more people now play, certain games at home, especially I've talked about this briefly in the past, with how much more common like Steam has become as a platform for home users and things like that. This isn't the entire picture of Korea. It's a pretty good snapshot. But just because, 8 and 7% sounds pretty small compared to 46 of League of Legends does not mean that that's something that we can ignore. And, it also doesn't mean that League of Legends is entirely untouchable. Obviously, Overwatch on release had toppled that for a little bit and shook things up before League of Legends took the reins once again. Other than that, nothing too crazy. There have been some small shifts here and there in the 20s and the 40s of the rankings, but that's really where it gets to, maybe there's like 1 or 2 rank changes just because people played it this week, or maybe there was a small update this week for certain games. But the top 10 is usually where we want to focus. So Sudden Attack, the FPS that's been going on forever in Korea, and one of those games that just seems to survive every change, is continuing to be at the top. Now, in relation to the news we talked about last week, and obviously the news that's kind of on everyone's mind and probably will be until the game releases, in relation to Valorant, the FPS being developed by Riot Games, that will be an interesting thing to follow. If Sudden Attack can continue to have this surge now and then again, and whenever they have massive content updates, how is Valorant going to shake things up? Again, Overwatch shook things up quite a bit. PUBG shook things up, right? PUBG has been that number 1 FPS, TPS, basically a shooter genre game in Korean PC cafes for quite some time now, after Overwatch, I guess, stagnated down below it. But Overwatch always followed closely afterwards, so those 2 games were kind of the go-to shooter games in that genre for Korea. No one could really imagine it otherwise. But if Sudden Attack can continue to come back up into this, is Valorant going to, maybe finally topple Sudden Attack as a game, right? Because they are probably very close in genre. Sudden Attack, if you don't know, the easiest way to explain it, and I don't mean to diminish either of these games, but the easiest way to explain is it's the CS of Korea, right? So, there are other modes, but there's a defuse mode. There's obviously a deathmatch mode, but the defuse mode is one single spawn, and the movement and everything looks similar. And I'm not saying that it plays the same way, but that is where it is. So, to give you an idea, so Valorant, out of PUBG, Sudden Attack, and Overwatch, the top 3, I guess, shooter games in Korea, Sudden Attack's probably the closest one to Valorant. So is Valorant going to affect that? Or is this going to be another case where Sudden Attack wins out, stands the test of time, and for some reason has people coming back after trying Valorant when it releases? It'll be an interesting phenomenon, one way or the other. And I think it's going to be a big topic for a lot of people in Korea that are interested in gaming trends, and also just the development of games. So we'll have to wait and see. Not too long, though. Obviously, Valorant announced a date for the summer. I'm assuming that is for their release, although I'm not entirely sure. But we'll wait and find out. That's it for the PC Cafe rankings. Again, nothing too crazy this week. It's not like we have groundbreaking content updates every week. Obviously, this week, I guess today, starting today, Operation Void Edge will be available. So I am interested to see if Rainbow Six Siege continues to gain a little bit more traction once again in Korea, especially in PC cafes. But we'll have to wait and see. I think single spawn games are an interesting genre to deal with PC cafes, because again, the downtime, like you're paying to be there, and if you're playing with your friends, like is the downtime really worth it? That's that's one of the many reasons League of Legends can be so popular, not even just in PC cafes but just in general, right? That you're always involved, you're always doing something, you can always feel that you're contributing. Maybe whether you are or you aren't is a different question, but you can have that perception that you are even if you're not good at the game. So we'll see. So I think next week we'll have maybe a little bit more to talk about with Operation Void Edge. Obviously, Warzone coming out. I don't know if that's going to even make a dent on the charts. Quite frankly, I'm a little skeptical. But there will be plenty more news to follow. And then maybe sometime soon, Valorant Beta will shake things up as well. Moving on from that, we have, a bunch of news that probably you're aware of if you're a fan of esports in Korea, with basically pretty much every league being either like indefinitely canceled, postponed, or moved to online only. And this isn't obviously just in Korea. I think it's affecting a lot of events throughout the world, and more organizers, whether they be the developers themselves, the developer publishers themselves, or other TOs, obviously just taking precaution. We just had the news of MSI being delayed until July, which that cannot have been an easy decision. Whether it's a delay, a cancel, whatever it might be, none of that seems like it's an easy decision. To delay it, I think it's great that the fans will still, can still hope to take in that event in its entirety. But again, from an organization standpoint, having to delay something that's part of a yearly cycle and now affects, everything else that they've planned for within that timeline is going to be very complicated. So things have been similar in Korea. Of course, if you're a League of Legends fan, you know that LCK is now suspended indefinitely until things are updated on the front for the coronavirus. This is all in relation to the coronavirus, by the way, if somehow you've been living under a rock and you haven't really heard about it, whether it's affecting you directly or not. Especially in Korea, it's just been very widespread. Obviously, part of that is that tests are also just being done more aggressively and more widespread than maybe in other regions. And there's better tracking for it here for multiple different reasons. One, obviously, being that Korea was the second region to have the most outbreaks immediately. But also, like, Korea is a smaller country. They just, the government also just has a lot more information and tracking about its citizens, at least for me personally, in my comparison, than the United States. So it's, for in these cases, it's very easy for the government to put in these systems to track like where everyone's been and what they've done and, who they might have ran into. And then, of course, the medical aid system is different in Korea compared to the States. But then again, a lot of places are different and therefore more easily accessible than they are in the States. So that's one of the reasons why the tests have been able to be done more aggressively, and therefore we have more confirmations in Korea than I think maybe a lot of other regions. But I think League of Legends LCK being played, without an audience, and then now just being on hiatus indefinitely is quite a big telltale sign. I can only imagine that decision was made in part because MSI was also delayed, instead of rather just going to an online format as LPL had decided after trying to hold off on a longer hiatus. Since LCK did start on time, I think the idea is that, hey, we can take a little bit of a break, maybe have this thing blow over a little bit at least, even if it's not completely solved, before we return to maybe only a studio broadcast again. I assume that is going to be the course of action for LCK, that the first step will be to try to return to a studio broadcast with no audience as soon as possible, and then eventually, when things are actually stable and resolved in terms of the COVID virus, that they'll return to full strength. But for now, we'll just have to wait and see. LCK is not the first league to do that. In fact, it's one of the last leagues to do that in Korea. Cartwriter League had suspended very, very early on into the season. As soon as the virus outbreak happened, they tried to do it without an audience, and then they just put it on hiatus. A lot of sports leagues are now actually just like on hiatus, not even being played without an audience. For a while, they were being played without an audience, but the entire league's just been suspended because players, for instance, foreign players have gone home just to avoid other complications, whether it's travel or health and whatnot. And so because of just the wider risk, they've actually put a lot of the sports leagues on hiatus. ASL did continue, right? It started without the audience and it's continuing. I think maybe that's one of those cases that it continues just because it's less people, right? Because it's a 1v1 game. Even if you have groups and things like that, it is less people in one space. So I wonder if that's a case where they try to continue with the league without an audience. But I think we're gonna have to wait and see. I think a lot of the analysis around the virus was predicting that the first week of March was kind of going to be the peak, and where you're gonna see like the most cases and without any solutions. And it's supposed to become better as we're moving on, but those at the end of the day, it's all predictions. And I say this every time this topic comes up. For those of you who maybe aren't directly affected by the virus in one way or another, whether it's because you're in a healthy state and scientifically the virus doesn't seem like it's going to affect you as badly, or if you're not in a region where there are as many outbreaks. So what we've been seeing, and I see a lot of this talk right now, whether it's among actual researchers or just other people from different regions, is generally people seem to be taking this virus in two different ways. A is panic, which is also not good. But B is also just like ignoring it and diminishing what it actually is, which is also not good, right? So as a good example, yes, it is being said that, and the tests and results are showing that it obviously doesn't affect healthy people, especially, if you're in like your late teens or mid 20s to 30s, right? It's just like the general standard for kind of where you should be peak health, right, in your lifetime. It's not supposed to affect you that badly, right? It affects you kind of like the flu. You feel terrible and you're dealing with all these symptoms, and maybe you have to take some meds, and then it blows over. That's fine. But just because it doesn't affect you doesn't mean it doesn't affect other people. And especially in areas like, for instance, Korea, where a lot of the big cities are super, super dense. The reason that everyone instantly is just like taking more precaution, and the government is trying to encourage and or enforce that in certain regions of the society, is because with that much density, like you can't guarantee that you're not coming in contact with other people that can be affected by it, in a more deadly manner, whether it's because of age, whether it's because of health. You just can't promise that, right? So for instance, I live in a building with mostly people, I think, in my same age group, maybe even younger. I think there's like two families, like smaller families, in one of the bigger studios. And I think there's one unit that's like an actual apartment. But other than that, our building's like mostly, I would say there's like two or three people that are older than me from who I've like seen in passing. It's not like we have a game night every week, so I don't know them personally. But also generally, just if you're living in a studio, you're probably in your like 20s to 30s, maybe early 40s, right? Without you're not married yet, or you're like living away from your family for work, and so we're probably okay. But our landlord is a elderly couple, right? So, and they like manage this building on their own, right? This is kind of like a pet project of theirs. This building is a pet project of theirs. So again, like you just have to consider these things in a more dense area where things may not be as spread out and maybe systemic in a different way. And so again, should everyone be panicking? Probably not. In terms of like buying, things like water and just being prepared, I think that's a case of, listen, it's not that the apocalypse is coming, but for instance, like events are shutting down. So maybe, production obviously is being slowed down for certain things, especially with China being hit the hardest. So again, if someone wants to be prepared, like don't put them down for it, right? But also like don't panic. Like the world's not going to end. Viruses happen. Even in my lifetime, we've seen several viruses. I just haven't been in the heart of them prior. This is the first one where like I'm in a region that is severely affected by one. But I think we just need to be a little bit more level-headed. I think we need to be a little bit more understanding when events are being canceled. I think, again, if you had plan to attend and maybe you had financial investments, I think it's fair to try to look for compensation. I think it's fair to be frustrated and upset as a fan. I don't think it's fair to look at the organizers and be like, what the hell are you doing? The virus is not deadly. Like, that's not the stance you should be taking. And I know I'm kind of going on a PSA rant, but it's just been, I think it's been A, bothering me quite a bit, and B, more so because even for me, not that I would like, tell people that they're being silly in the past viruses if they were more concerned than me, but I just didn't care as much in the past because like I just didn't live in a region that was being affected by it as much, right? I lived in upstate New York where, for instance, when like SARS broke out, my dad was still in Korea, so I was hearing about things indirectly of how there was bigger concern there, but as a kid just going to school in upstate New York, eventually SARS was just like a project of mine for a science class where we had to do a presentation. It didn't affect me otherwise, and I didn't really think much of it. And now being in a region where it impacts it very differently, I'm seeing it a little differently as well. So I just want people to try to be a little bit more level-headed as well. Yeah, and it sounds like in chat, Kropi's saying that Spanish, French, and Italian football leagues are either suspended or playing without the public as well. I think again, even sports, right? Same with esports, but even sports, again, like players come from different regions, right? You have import players, and so the risk, and especially for sports, because like I guess the product is like directly related to health, right? So, not that other work isn't affected by health, but that is like literally your health is your product. So, that I think it's very fair. For those events or other concerns to be following there. I know several other events were being canceled. I think E3 just got canceled this morning, correct? I think I saw that headline. I didn't have a chance to really dig into it. I'm not surprised. Honestly, with kind of all the other doubt building up to E3, I think I talked about this before. I think it's better for E3's sake, right? Just to take this break and then try to regroup. Obviously unfortunate for everyone who wanted to attend, but music festivals are being canceled left and right. So let's just all be patient, and then let's let things blow over. Speaking of esports as well in Korea, so this one I actually was not aware of building up to this, and I only found out because of the headline, but SPO TV, or SPO TV Games, rather. SPO TV itself is existing. So for those who don't know, a quick little history. SPO TV is a sports network. It is a sports channel on cable in Korea. Several years back, they created a sub-channel, or I guess a sister channel called SPO TV Games. It initially started as just like a part of that channel, right, during certain time slots of SPO TV, and just doing things online. Eventually it built into its own channel within the whole TV network system. So SPO TV Games became a games channel, similar to how OGN was born as a cable gaming channel way back in the day. So SPO TV Games comes into the fray and becomes a new challenger for OGN, as it used to be in the way past of the 2000s, early 2000s, where NBC had NBC Games, and OGN were competing back then. SPO TV Games, if you aren't aware, they've done some League of Legends stuff throughout until LCK became its standalone thing in recent years. But for instance, SPO TV and OGN were splitting broadcasts for a little bit. You would know if you were following LCK for quite some time. They had the whole 2 days of the week were broadcasts from the OGN studios, and 2 days were from the SPO TV studios, and one would have the main broadcast and the other would have to piggyback, and there were all these things. So SPO TV Games it still has its footing, right? SPO TV Games is also the main partner for pretty much everything Nexon when it comes to esports. And I had talked about this, I think 3 episodes ago, where they had also just announced their new, I guess, mini stadium or arena, I guess is a better term, for all their esports and gaming ventures. But SPO TV Games has now rebranded to Star TV. I don't know what the real plan is. It appears that they are, it appears that branding change happened and people were concerned that SPO TV was dropping SPO TV Games. It sounds like it's technically still under the same company, It's just they're rebranding it to Star TV, and the claim is that it is to help expand into a broader area of entertainment rather than just esports. But they specifically said they will continue covering esports. But in that same statement, they also said that this is a way for them to focus on like new variety programs as well. And so variety shows in Korea basically mean like gaming / talk shows, right? And so I'm a little curious because so variety shows and well, actually, just Korean TV entertainment has seen quite a big shift recently, where a lot of these cable channels started really threatening to take over in terms of being the main source of entertainment or main source of, whether it's news even and other media compared to the national broadcasts. So KBS, NBC, and then SBS are the three big national channels and national networks. And for instance, the biggest variety shows and the biggest dramas were always on those three channels, right? And those three would always compete. They would always, one of them would have the most watched shows all the time. And then in the past, I would say 5 to 8 years, many cable channels have started taking over. And certain variety programs on cable channels are now the most watched when they're on. Dramas have been pretty much actually been taken over by cable networks, and now there's no difference, right? In the past, people used to put a pretty big difference on, is it on cable or is it on the national broadcast system? But now, like, you can't really grade things that way, and it's interesting to me that they would rebrand their gaming channel to just be like a wider source of entertainment, because there's two ways this can go. One way is the gaming stuff eventually gets pushed out, right? Because maybe that audience just doesn't overlap much. But the other way is it actually indirectly maybe introduces gaming to more people, as we see gaming itself just being consumed by more people at a casual level. So it all comes down to the programming, obviously, and their marketing. But we'll have to wait and see. I'm also curious on if that's going to change maybe their strategy in digital distribution when it comes to the content that would be on SPO TV Games, or now known as Star TV. But that is the rebranding that's going to be happening with SPO TV Games. So if you were interested in following a lot of the Nexon games, they also have been hosting the esports night, or 10 as it's shortened. That's been a kind of side event that I think flew under the radar for a lot of global audiences, but where they do these kind of event matches and maybe bring back historic stuff. So the opening event for 10 was doing the telecom wars for StarCraft with that whole Pro League setup. And so it was a T1 versus KT, and they have some fun things like that. So the second episode was bringing back or kind of showcasing the rivalries of Kart Rider. So it's another series or event series where they do show matches of some significance with a lot of the games going on in Korea. So something to keep in mind. But moving forward, I guess we'll start to see everything rebranded into Star TV. So that's something we'll have to keep note of. Unfortunately, I didn't have time to dig in to see if there's been a lot of talk about Warzone in Korea, but I'm not surprised. I wouldn't be too surprised if there wasn't too much talk. I mean, it was announced the day before it got released, and then it was released at midnight in Korea for Modern Warfare owners, and then it just released overnight for everyone as a free-to-play. So I'm sure we'll have something to talk about next week, or maybe the news will be that there's nothing to talk about because Koreans aren't talking about the game next week. But I am curious, right? Because Korea still has a pretty big PUBG player base, and I'm wondering if enough people there will be maybe trying Warzone out, what their thoughts will be as a primarily PUBG-focused BR community in Korea. Because in the West we have people like playing multiple BRs or coming from all different BRs every time a new one comes out, so we get such a different take from all sorts of people. But in Korea, I think at the end of the day, if you're playing a BR, most people it's pretty much strictly PUBG. So I wonder if the opinions will be a little different. Obviously, I'll be playing Warzone later on my channel on stream right here, so we can talk about what we're seeing and what our thoughts are there. If you want to hang out and chat and check it out if you haven't had a chance to watch or play it yet, and then also hear my thoughts on that game. That's about it for this week on the connection. There's been some mobile games being released. I guess one thing I should note is, so living in Korea, I think I'm actually gonna switch my Android account to Korea so that I can download all these new mobile games coming in Korea, because there's like always new news about mobile games. There's always news about mobile games, whether it's new ones coming out, new content drops in Korea, as mobile gaming's even bigger here, not in terms of like sheer number, but just how widespread it is and how common it is. And so there's a bunch of these mobile like battle royale arena style games coming out, similar to how there's currently several arena based battle royales, like third person action battle royales being developed for PC in Korea as well. If you haven't heard, games like Shadow Arena, and then I don't even remember the other one, but to me it was a way worse experience than Shadow Arena. But Shadow Arena is the one from Pearl Abyss. If you don't know, who are the developers of Black Desert. And it's basically from the Black Desert universe. So if you're interested in that, check that out. My first impression was that it still doesn't really work out that well as a BR, but I mean, if you like the combat, maybe it's something to follow. But there's a bunch of similar games coming out for mobile in Korea, so I think I'm gonna have to try it. Follow the headline so we can talk a little bit more about that and the trends here in terms of mobile gaming and how quickly things change and how quickly things are being developed. But yeah, there's news of a couple things such as A3. I've talked about that, I think, in episode 1 when it was first announced. I think A3 we can start downloading in like 2 days, but I have to sign up on a Korean account if I want. So I think that's something we'll check out. But other than some mobile news, and then continued news about a lot of game companies working from home, and maybe suspending some production or progress. Obviously, they're still trying to do everything they can to upkeep services, and it's not really affecting fans currently. But most game companies have mandated that everyone work from home for quite some time. I think most companies are actually still continuing this week. Originally, it was until last week, but I think a lot of companies are still continuing this week. And then, of course, we've had news of a lot of pro esports players, or personalities in Korea making donations to whether it's research funds or to production of the healthcare needs, whether it's like the masks or whatever for healthcare professionals and things like that. So that's really great to see. I think it helps put esports on these headlines that maybe other people who just don't watch gaming would be exposed to it and be like, oh wow, like these people are making money, but they're also putting it to good use. So that's great to see. On that note, completely unrelated to gaming, so currently, this is actually just a little bit about Korea. I want to go on this tangent before we wrap up here, but just because I was kind of caught off guard by this, but by the conclusion of the story, not the introduction. So the introduction of the story is masks have always been very common in Korea. Okay, for multiple different reasons, masks have always been common. Masks are like worn all the time by celebrities to hide their face when they like just go out grocery shopping or whatever. Masks are used all the time by like people who've had plastic surgery done, right? And they're waiting for things to settle and heal. And then also in recent years, because of the air pollution that has gotten so bad in Korea at times throughout different seasons, masks have become very common. And so, Korea has had just stronger masks become more commonplace for quite some time in terms of the filter, right? So that it can block out most of the pollution in the air. And so, it's not surprising, like during the winter sometimes, if, the news says, hey, by the way, today's weather forecast, the air pollution is really terrible today. Like you would just see pretty much everyone walking around with masks on. So keep that in mind, right? Masks are just more commonly used to begin with in Korea. Obviously, COVID breaks out, masks sell out much faster. Which, by the way, for everyone being like, masks are useless, it's not that they're useless, but it is true that they are obviously better for either healthcare professionals or sick people, or those caring for sick people. So, like, that's where it's most useful because you're in close contact and vicinity, and you're like actually like breathing like right in front of each other and things like that. But it's not that it's useless. Like the virus can still get through the mask, but when it's traveling through, I don't want to get into it because I'm not the one who did the research. But I was just curious as well, so I've looked things up. Obviously, if it's also carried by droplets, then the mask can help block that. So again, it's not that masks are useless. It's just more useful in those intimate contact scenarios. And so therefore, I think, I don't think it's fair to look at areas like Korea and China and be like, they're all just panicking about the mask. Because, like, trust me, if you've ever gotten on the subway during rush hour, like, that is as intimate contact as you can get with a group of people. So, and any big city would agree, I think. But Seoul is definitely infamous for that. Anyway, coming back to that. So because of all that, masks have, been selling out a lot more. And then, all these pharmacies now for a little while, they would have these like banners being like, oh, we have masks, right? And hand sanitizer. And now, apparently, starting last week, they are rationing out masks. I would assume, maybe I should look up the news articles on this, because I've only been told it through my family and then through the alerts I get on my phone. I would assume that this actually helps keep things in check for healthcare professionals as well, rather than masks just being like gone from everywhere, and limiting production for those who need it most. But so there is a ration system now for masks, or the highest grade of masks, right? You can still buy like the cheap cloth masks or whatever that maybe don't really do much good. And so I get alerts every morning, and every morning my phone does that whole alert noise you've heard if you watch me stream. It just has a blaring alarm, and then it goes, today, people whose birth year end in, like 1 and 7, may go and receive their masks. Limit 2 per person until supplies last. So this is a thing now. And it's just very weird to me, because I think most people would agree, like, right? Like, usually most people don't go through their lifetimes like having to go receive something on ration, right? Like, this isn't something I've ever had to consider of like, oh, I need to like go early and get this because it's being rationed out, and who knows if I can't get it later when I need it. And I think the idea is, if it's being rationed out this way, and production's obviously being throttled quite a bit, get it. I mean, for me as well, right? Because I have a bunch of relatives here, including my grandma, and so if we're all being limited to like 2 per week, I guess everyone in the family like collecting theirs when they can, just like can't hurt, because maybe we'll have to tend for each other or whatnot. Even my parents or my uncle is like, they're not young, right? So that's something to consider. But it was just weird to me, because my parents were like, by the way, I'm assuming you haven't seen the news, but you're gonna have to like go get your own masks now and get them on ration. And I was like, what? And then my phone started giving me these alarms. So my day is Thursdays, right? so my birth year lands on Thursdays. So I can go get my mask tomorrow. But it's only until supplies last. I actually have to check, like, I'm assuming there are partnered pharmacies or hospitals where you can get them. But it's a little weird. So I'm someone who, probably to my own demise, was not as anal about like health things at a scientific level, right? So the best way to put it is, for me, health was always like the first thing I sacrificed for work, which is a terrible way to go about things. I do not condone it, but that was just the way I did things. It's kind of the way now that I think about it, it's kind of the way my late grandmother on my mother's side did things as well. For her, it was always like, oh, if you just put your mind to it, like, you can do anything. And she always had terrible health because of that. And I think I just got it from her, where it's like, oh, like, do I have to grind to get this done more so than other people, or because like I have a different goal? Well, then I guess we're doing that. And so for me, it's only recent with maybe some of the health concerns I've had in like the past 1 or 2 years, and obviously now being in Korea, where I've started caring, or being a little bit more aware of how like society and community is treating health things, rather than just me looking at myself. I used to not go to, like, oh, see, there's another one. This is not about the mass, but this is an alarm about people who may have visited a certain area during. Oh, wait, hold on. See, you guys get live updates when you listen to my podcast. If you've been to, so I guess they've noticed that maybe there were several people with confirmed cases from a certain building who visited a certain building. So now they're saying anyone who's visited that building during a certain week should come get tested. Thankfully, I rarely leave my house other than to go to the store, so I'm safe. But going back to it, so where was I? About health systems. So now I used to, for instance, when I was younger, I used to not go to the doctors that often, right? If I got sick, I would just buy some meds and just rest, or maybe not even rest as much as I should. Again, nothing I condone. I don't recommend that. Don't live that way. But so as I've gotten older and I've actually had a couple health scares, and now some more health concerns that I really just need to keep track of, obviously I've become more aware. And then now also currently living in an area that generally is much more aware when it comes to health, because health systems are more available in Korea compared to the United States. Again, I'm speaking strictly to the US, but I guess for a lot of people, you look at the US and you're like, the health system there just doesn't make sense, because health is that's a whole political thing I don't want to get into right now. But that's part of it, right? So for instance, a good example is when I was in college, I slipped on the stairs, and I just got the wind knocked out of me. I couldn't breathe. Obviously my back and my tailbone was just in intense pain, and I couldn't move until someone thankfully was coming up the stairs and found me. And then they called the emergency services on campus, and so they came, and they checked for everything. By then I'd gotten my breathing back, and they had me take a couple steps, and they were like, okay, so you have two choices now. If you want to get an x-ray, we can take you to the ER, but that's gonna cost X amount, or you can just go rest. And the guy looks at me, because most of these are obviously students on campus when it comes to campus services. The guy looks at me and he says, honestly, from our immediate tests, I think you can go rest, but we are obligated to tell you that you have the option of going to the ER for an x-ray. And immediately I was like, I'm not paying that. I'm not paying that money to go get an x-ray. So that's how it was, right? And now in Korea, where people freak out that you're going to the doctors without insurance and you're getting diagnosed for $20 instead of $8. That's an actual conversation I had with people at OGN when I worked there. This is a country where those health systems are just more available. The community is more aware, maybe a little bit too acutely, and then now we're in the scenario where there is a virus outbreak. It's very weird to me, or it's just something I'm not familiar with, right? And so now being told that I need to go pick up my rationed 2 masks per week early in the morning, it's something that in some ways those are the things that kind of scare me. Not to the point of panic, but I'm like, oh, this, I can see it now. I'm like, oh, this is why people panic, because you see this in movies, right? You see it it always starts with quarantines, and this is how all those apocalypse movies start, right? It starts with a quarantine, and then you get rationed, and then you don't get your rations, so people start fighting. Obviously, those are a little bit more dramatized, but I can see why people would panic. It's not making me panic, and I don't think you need to. But it's also, again, it's one of those things where it's giving me perspective of, okay, you need to find a good balance, right? You need to not panic. You need to make sure you have the right information, but you also need to be prepared. So how do you find that balance? So that's just something to think about. I'm sorry I went on that tangent. It's not gaming related. It's a little off topic, but it is Korea related. So it's not completely off topic of what we discuss here on The Connection. So that's my excuse. But again, coronavirus has just kind of been the headline for everyone and everything these days. So I just wanted to cover that a little bit. Hopefully we'll have many more fun gaming things to talk about in the future episodes as we come up to those. Again, a couple things you will want to keep an eye on are Sudden Attack and Valorant and that relationship. Obviously, if Warzone really has any headlines at all in Korea. And then we'll see if and when leagues pick back up here in Korea, whether it's online, in studio, or even with fans in the near future. Until then, this was episode 5 of The Connection. Thank you for all those who tuned in. If you're watching live on Twitch, we are going to switch gears now and try Warzone a little further because we didn't get to play many games last night because there just weren't as many players online. We'll also be continuing with the Division 2, which had its season begin for the Warlords of New York expansion for year 1, or I guess year 2, but year 1 of the expansion. If you're watching on YouTube, which I will be uploading again starting this week, you can subscribe to the channel if you enjoy the content. There will be more content to come. I know it's very delayed, and I apologize, but I promise, I'm not just saying that just to make you click that subscribe button. There will be more content to come, whether it's more podcasts, whether it's more highlights and VODs from my stream, and then maybe further projects. I have many planned. It's just sometimes you have too many ideas and then you don't start any of them. So I have to narrow those down. So I appreciate your patience. I appreciate all the support. And then that's it for episode 5. We'll cross this bridge again next time on The Connection.